Okay, hello chess players. Today we're going to be going over how to face this particular weapon that sometimes people employ against the Sicilian defense. It happens after e4, c5, knight f3, d6, and then there's a number of different move orders to it. Sometimes they play bishop to d3 right away. This is called the Kopec system, but sometimes they get to the Kopec system via the c3 move order. I think this is a little bit more common. And then after knight f6, then they continue with bishop to d3. There's another system that people play, bishop e2, which is very similar to the Kopec system, but there are some slight differences, which I'm going to try to go over in a minute. And we need to know how to face this with the black pieces. We need to know what to do. We need to know how to equalize in this position. And basically, you just need to know the theory. So anyways, if you like content like this and want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button and click on your notification icon. So bishop d3 is sort of the mainline Kopec system. And actually between the two, between bishop e2 and bishop to d3, bishop d3 is a little bit harder to face, in my opinion. I think it's a little bit more dangerous of a move than even bishop e2. Although I would say at my level, I think I see bishop e2 a little bit more than I see bishop to d3. Maybe it's just because there is a little bit of a trap here. You know, you can't play knight takes e4 because of queen to a4 check, picking up that knight. So there's a little bit of a nuance here. It feels correct. And it's also, it feels like you're not getting in the way of your d4 push. So sort of from a traditional level, just kind of looking at it, you're not getting in the way of your d4 push. And because of that, I think I see bishop to e2 a little bit more. But bishop d3 might actually be a little bit better, because when you play bishop d3 and you bring your bishop back to c2, and then eventually play d4, that bishop is defending the pawn on e4, but also the bishop on c2 is sort of ideally placed. What you're trying to do is you're trying to play something that's very similar to a Ruy Lopez, but you're just not playing a Ruy Lopez, move order or structure. You're just sort of transposing into it via the Sicilian move order. The reason that white can get away with a move like bishop d3 in a position like this in the first place is because it's very difficult for black to open the position quickly. When you play c5, you're not really opening your pieces to develop. So because you've made a move to play c5, you've played the Sicilian defense, you've sort of agreed to play a closed position if that's what white wants to do. So if white wants to keep the position closed for a couple moves, there's not a lot of really fast ways to open the position for black. So basically what I'm saying is white can get away with this. White can get away with putting his bishop in front of his pawn temporarily and then retreating it. He can still expect to have some sort of slight edge, or at the very least he should have something akin to equality. So after bishop d3, what we need to do is we just need to develop, play something like knight c6. And one of the key threats that you have in a position like this is at some point to play bishop to g4. For example, if bishop c2 right away, you should just play bishop g4. And it's very difficult for white to get anything out of this after you play bishop g4 because you've made it really hard to play d4. But also on top of that, when you do reach your closed positions, that are going to be very similar to Sicilian closed positions after, say, g6, bishop g7, castles kingside, and then white is going to be forced to play d3 instead of d4, you're going to continue with this normal sort of attack with rook b8, b5, b4, etc., and your position is going to look pretty good without having that light squared bishop. It's actually a lot easier for black to maneuver behind his lines without that light squared bishop. Sort of an example of how that might go down is, let's say they play h3. Of course, you have multiple options here. There was a game played between Nakamura and Nepomniachtchi that continued with bishop to h5, and of course that's also a perfectly reasonable way to go in this position. But you can just you can play bishop takes f3, and after queen takes f3, as you can see, it's very difficult to play d4, so now we're just going to play g6, d3, bishop g7, castles, castles, queen e2, and as you can see, b5 right away is a completely reasonable move. You don't even have to prep it with rook b8 because, it's just there. This is actually a game played between Smeets and Van Forest, played back in 2019, and black actually got an advantage, and black eventually went on to win. The basic idea is after, say, a3, a5, knight d2, knight d7, knight f3, you're just going to play b4. You're going to go after, after bishop a4, you're going to play queen c7. It's very useful that you don't have a light squared bishop here. The rooks communicate very well. Everything is held. Everything is doing pretty good. And then eventually you're just going to put pressure on white's position on the c3 square, and then you're going to bring a rook to b8, and of course all of black's pieces are working, so This should be at least equality, but probably at this point slight edge black. So black is just doing really good here. This is kind of an ideal outcome for everything that's going on. So going back, when they play bishop to d3, they really need to include h3 if they want to get any type of advantage. It makes black's defensive task a lot more difficult when he has this light squared bishop and he just sort of doesn't know what to do with it. We have to come up with an idea for this light squared bishop down the road, and it's a little annoying. So g6 is sort of the correct move. We're going to have bishop to c2. We're going to have bishop to g7. We just continue to develop. Although I will point out that after analyzing the positions in the Kopec system for a while, I didn't see any reason why e5 would be a problem here. Maybe just e5 right away is one of the ways to go. And this seems very reasonable to me to just try to equalize fairly quickly. For example, if they play d4, you can just exchange everything. You can take, knight takes d4, and then play bishop g7. And yeah, there's a slight weakness on the d6 square, but you can liquidate that fairly quickly. For example, after bishop e3, you would get your king out of the middle and then just play d5. And you should have something close to equality, if not already complete equality. This was actually played in Hansen versus Grandulis, played back in 2018, and the game ended in a draw, and it wasn't even much of a fight. So you could just try to equalize this way. This seems very, very reasonable. So e5 is a serious possibility, just meeting d4 with just capturing everything and then liquidating your d-pawn weakness after everything is liquidated in the middle. But bishop g7 and then castles is also perfectly reasonable. And then we have d4, cd4, cd4, and now it's actually like a big decision point. I used to think that d5 was kind of the way to go here. A lot of books had that written in it. I'd seen some games with d5. Turns out, if you look at this on an engine, or even just... I experimented with this for a couple days to try to find some practical results, where I found people that played this opening, which was hard, because it is actually rare. I don't run into it a whole lot, but I found some people that played this opening, and I just tried to play them over and over again, and I experimented with different moves. I experimented with d5, and I experimented with e5. And what I discovered is that not only does the engine prefer e5, I pretty much lost every game I played with d5, and I won every game I played with e5. So it's not just that the engine likes it, it seems to be objectively the best move, and the best move for chances is to play this move pawn to e5 to just kind of equalize in the center of the board. So basically white has two options. He can push his pawn, or he can try to protect it. If he tries to protect it with a move like bishop e3, we're following Belyakov versus Artemev, played in Moscow, Russia in 2017, which continued with the immediate d5. Here you can get away with d5. You don't have to worry about pawn to e5 as a response. So e5 followed by d5 is actually a threat. So e5, bishop e3, d5, that game continued knight takes e5, knight takes e4, knight c6, bc6, knight d2, knight d6, rook c1, queen b6, and then white made the mistake of playing after bishop b1, rook e8, white made the mistake of playing pawn to b3. After pawn to b3, black got a decisive advantage with the move bishop to a6, and then after rook e1, bishop takes d4 was actually decisive advantage black, and black did in fact go on to win. So going back, bishop e3 holding the pawn is an option, d5 is an option. d5 is probably the better option. This is probably still some sort of slight edge white. Knight b4 is the correct move from black, and now white has two options. He can try to keep his bishop pair but sacrifice a pawn, or he can give you the bishop pair. He can play knight to c3, and then you get the bishop pair. You play knight takes c2, and then queen takes c2, and essentially what this is it's a King's Indian defense position. Black has a little bit less space, so black should be slightly worse because of the space disadvantage, but that's already compensated for by the fact that black has a bishop pair, and black is going to be compensated in the center by having counterplay, by being able to play f7, f5 at some point. Now, there was a bunch of games here, but nobody played the computer best move, which was just to retreat the knight, just to play knight e8. This is what Stockfish wanted to do. And then it wanted to meet a4 with f5, and it thought this position was just equal. It said that this was equal, possibly even a little bit better for black. It liked black here. Everything was doing fine. I didn't find anybody that tried that. I didn't even find anybody that tried knight e8. Knight h5 has been tried a few times. Those positions are interesting and unclear. Bishop d7 has been tried more than once, and then sometimes people follow that with knight h5. those positions are interesting and unclear, but I did run into one game where somebody played queen b3, and then the person playing black just retreated the bishop back to c8 for lack of anything better to do. And actually, he played 2 games in this position. He played one with bishop c8 and one with b6, and he managed to win both games. That was one of them was Sevian versus Sorana, and he managed to win both games with the black pieces. But already I would say that white is slightly better if black has to play either b6 or bishop c8 in this position. We're not getting in f5 or knight f4 the way we want to, and we're not getting it in immediately or whatever. But that's what happened in both cases. After bishop c8, for example, bishop e3, he has to play f5, and we have to try to gain counterplay this way. But probably white is a little bit better in these positions. Maybe somewhere between a little bit better to a lot better in these positions. So it's probably better to just not try any of this other stuff with bishop d7 or knight h5. Just retreat the knight, play knight e8, and then after something like a4, just play f5 right away. And these positions should be at least equality. So going back, there is this other approach. After d5 and then knight b4 attacking that bishop, it is possible for white to try to keep this bishop. And this actually leads to a pretty wild continuation. Black can take the pawn on e4, and then white double attacks with queen e1. And I came across a couple of games here. I came across a couple of Nakamura games where Nakamura actually had the white pieces. I came across a couple of other games. The line is the ensuing line is really forced. So like you have to play knight takes f2 to get something out of it. Queen takes f2 and then knight d3, and then there's queen e3 and queen e2, which are close to the same move. Against both, you're going to play pawn to e4, sacrificing this pawn, but you're also setting up this shot of knight takes bishop followed by bishop takes b2. This is the idea. And after queen takes e4, knight takes c1, rook c1, bishop takes b2. Knight c3, bishop f5, queen e2, ripping the rook, rook takes, and then queen b6 check. This position should be slight edge black according to the computer. Actually, even just after bishop takes a1, this position should be slight edge black according to the computer. Now, we do have a couple of games that continued from here. One game continued with queen f6 question mark, which was already a mistake, and eventually white ended up going on to win after a few more mistakes from black. But overall, the computer says black should be good here. So this should be slight edge black, beginning with the move queen b6. So a little bit of computer preparation, queen b6 check, king to h2, rook a to c8, knight to e4, queen b4, knight g3, rook fe8, queen b2, we'll say queen f4, rook d1, rook e4 should be slight edge white. One example the computer gives is rook f1, then rook e3, queen f6, h5. So just a few more moves after the exchange of queens. We kind of go into this wild line, and the dust settles eventually with black taking on d5 and sort of just having a couple extra pawns. But white has a lot of activity for it. But this should be advantage black. Now, I did mention at the beginning of the video I was going to kind of go over this move as well. I think I'm going to have to go over this bishop e2 move in its own video because these positions are a little bit different. But generally speaking, this video did cover how to meet this bishop d3 move, how do we meet the Kopec system, and I hope you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and thank you very much for watching.